Resuming debate, the honourable member for Chilliwack Hope will have about four minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and as always, it's a pleasure to stand in the House on behalf of my constituents to call for common sense in this case from this government. We have been calling, as common sense conservatives, calling on the government, the SDTC, which is the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and the Auditor General to hand over all documents related to the Prime Minister's Green Slush Fund to the RCMP. Now, that matter was decided in the House of Commons by a vote of the House of Commons. And one of the privileges of parliamentarians of this House is, in fact, to call for the production of papers, to demand papers from the government. And as we know, right now we are in a privileged debate because the Speaker himself has determined that there is a prima facie case. On the face of it, it appears as though the government has violated the privileges of members of Parliament. That's why we are now days into a discussion about the Prime Minister's refusal to comply with a direct order of the House. Because refusing to comply with an order of the House by this government violates each and every one of our privileges. And as is evidenced by the fact that no other business is allowed to take place. The Speaker has said no other business may take place until this matter is disposed of. Because it is so serious when members' collective rights or members' individual rights are violated, that the House must stop all other business. All other business goes to the bottom of the pile until we have addressed this issue. So this is as serious as it gets for Parliament. There is no bills being debated. There are no private members' bills being debated because this is the most important issue that we have to deal with, and it's all because the government has refused to comply with a lawful order of this House of Commons. Well, Madam Speaker, after question period, I will be happy to continue to talk about this and about the pattern of corruption and ignoring the will of Parliament that this Liberal government, enabled by their friends in the NDP, has undertaken. But this is a serious matter. Our collective rights as a House of Commons have been threatened. The Speaker has said there is a prima facie case for this to be discussed, for this to be considered, and it must take precedence over every other matter that is before the House. So I know I don't have a lot of time before SO31 start, but I look forward to, after question period, resuming this discussion about the government's breach of the privileges of members of this place, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member will have another 6 minutes, 7 minutes to see. 16 minutes, yes.
Resuming debate, the honourable member from
Speaker, and
the honourable member that he has 16 minutes left in debate.
Well, I'll be able to get started by then, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. As was just indicated by the table, we are debating a motion today on privilege, and I wanted to read into the record some information on parliamentary privilege from the rcommons.ca website, which indicates that parliamentary privilege refers to the rights and immunities that are deemed necessary for the House of Commons as an institution and its members as representatives of the electorate to fulfill their functions. It also refers to the powers possessed by the House to protect itself, its members and its procedures from undue interference so that they can carry out effectively their principal functions, which are to legislate, deliberate, and hold the government to account. Parliamentary privileges were first claimed centuries ago when the English House of Commons was struggling to establish a distinct role for itself within Parliament. These privileges were necessary to protect the House of Commons and its members from the power and interference of the King and the House of Lords. The privileges enjoyed by the House and its members are part of the Constitution and are vital to the proper functioning of Parliament. This is as true today as it was centuries ago when the English House of Commons first fought to secure these privileges and rights. Mr. Speaker, that puts into perspective here that this is a very serious matter, that any time we are talking about the privileges of the House of Commons, we are talking about a serious matter. And that, again, as I said before question period, is why no other business can take place, because protecting the privileges of this House is deemed to be the most important thing that we can do. And that is why the Speaker took the opportunity to deliver a ruling saying that he believed that on the face of it, it was a breach of the privileges of the members of this House and indeed of this House itself, that the government had refused to turn over documents after a lawful order from the House of Commons. And that is what we are discussing today. And all of the bluster and blarney that we heard from the government during question period about how this is somehow about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is absolute nonsense. This is about the privileges of the House of Commons, the privileges that we have to uphold the rule of law, the privileges that we have to demand documents, to demand papers of the government. It might seem like a quaint thing to refer back to the King and the House of Lords, but without protecting the privileges of this House, we have no authority. And we have a government that can run roughshod over the will of the elected House of Commons, which is what they are trying to do right now. This is a lawful order from not just the Conservative Party and the official opposition, from the majority of the House of Commons. The majority of this House has demanded papers and has done so legally, and after consulting with the legal counsel of the House, these documents have been requested, they have been demanded. The government has no authority to redact the documents, to hand over some of them, or in the case of the Privy Council office, to tell the departments to ignore the request of the House of Commons. That is a breach of our privileges, and that is why we're discussing this instead of things like millions of Canadians lining up at the food bank for the first time. And as we heard in question period today, while Canadians are lining up at the food bank, Liberals are lining their pockets. It's a good time to be a Liberal insider. And that's what we found under the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund, where 186 times the board was found to have been in a conflict. They made decisions on money based on a conflict of interest. There was a conflict involved. 186 times. That's why the Auditor General has gotten involved. Nearly $400 million of funds from this government have gone to Liberal insiders or have been questioned by the government. $400 million. And that's why the House of Commons, not the Conservative Party, the House of Commons has demanded that the Auditor General and the government hand over the documents to the RCMP. The RCMP will do with them what they will. But that is not a decision for the government to make. An order has been given from this House to produce the documents, to give them to the RCMP, and they can use those documents to form their own opinions. But we cannot have a situation where a lawful order of this House is ignored, is amended, or is changed on the whim of the Prime Minister and his office and his bureaucracy in the PCO. That is not how the House of Commons works. And the government, I believe, has violated the privileges not only of individual members, but of the House itself. The document I referred to goes on to talk about the structure of privileges. It says the privileges of members of the House of Commons provide the absolute immunity they require to perform their parliamentary work, while the collective or corporate rights of the House are the necessary means by which the House effectively discharges its functions. These rights are enjoyed by both the individual members of Parliament, because the House cannot perform its functions without its members, and by the House as a whole for the protection of its members as well as its own authority and dignity. And it goes on to list the individual rights and immunities, the freedom of speech in the House of Commons and committee, freedom from arrest and civil actions, exemption from jury duty, exemption from being subpoenaed to attend court as a witness, freedom from obstruction, interference, and intimidation. And then it talks about the collective rights of the House of Commons to discipline those found in breach of privilege or in contempt, and to remove members for misconduct, to regulate its own internal affairs, including its debates, agenda, and facilities, to maintain the attendance and service of its members, to institute inquiries and demand papers. It is very clear that when our rights are violated, when we are not able to demand papers or our lawful demand for papers is ignored, that the rights of the House have been violated. And that's why we're here today, because we cannot stand idly by while the government arbitrarily decides that they are above the elected House of Commons, that what they believe is right supersedes what the House of Commons has voted on and has determined is the right thing to do. Because if we allow this to happen, if the government can just ignore all of the rules, all of the votes of the House of Commons, where would we be, Mr. Speaker? What if Canadian citizens took the same approach and were able to simply ignore the work that is done here in the House of Commons? That would not be a system that any of us would want to live under. So it is hard to overstate the seriousness of a matter when the rights and privileges of Parliament are under threat as they are today. But it's not the first time that this government has done something of this nature when they've been faced with a ruling or a decision of the House that they didn't like. You'll recall in June of 2021, where the Liberals took the Speaker of the House of Commons to court to block the release of unredacted records about fired scientists under the Winnipeg lab scandal. They took a Liberal Speaker to court. The Government of Canada, the Liberal government, took a Speaker to court. It has never been done before in the history of Canada, because they were so afraid of what would be revealed there, and so afraid to allow the will of the House of Commons to be followed, that they were going to go to court to undermine the privileges of the House. And if you read through this, any of the news articles on that matter, it said here, the Speaker's office will defend the rights of this House. This is something I take very seriously. The legal system does not have any jurisdiction over the operations of the House. We are our own jurisdiction. This is something we will fight tooth and nail to protect, and we will continue to do that. That was from the former Speaker of the House. He said, and Mr. Dufresne, the former law clerk of the House, said the House has exclusive authority when it comes to matters that fall under parliamentary privilege. So this government has gone to extreme lengths before, and they're doing it again to protect themselves, to protect Liberal insiders from having their secrets revealed, from having documents that have been lawfully ordered by this House actually tabled as required. But we know that the Liberals don't have much time for this House. It's a nuisance. It's not something they value. It's not something that they honor. We saw this with Bill Morneau during the COVID, when this House was actually shut down. We saw Bill Morneau try to circumvent the rights of members of Parliament to examine and vote on budget matters for 2 years. He tried to circumvent the rights of this House. Luckily, it was the leader of the opposition at the time, the finance critic, who found that little nugget buried away and called it out and put a stop to it. But that is where their mind is at. Wherever they can, these Liberals will undermine Parliament for their own benefit. We've seen a number of times. We have actually, Mr. Speaker, if this matter is dealt with, if this breach of privilege is dealt with by this House anytime soon, which I think many of us have things that we want to say about that, the government, of course, could end this today by complying with the lawful order of the House of Commons and releasing the documents that the House of Commons has demanded that they release to the RCMP. This could all be over this afternoon. But we know that that is not the inclination of the government because they believe they know best. They don't have to abide by the rules. And they're putting that on display. But there's another, in the meantime, there is yet another question of privilege that is waiting in the wings. The next item of business after this one is done will be yet another question of privilege because this government has failed to comply with the wishes of the elected members of the House of Commons. We've seen time and time again where this government has broken their promises. In 2015, in the election that brought them to power, the Prime Minister said it's time to shine more light on government and ensure it remains focused on the people it is meant to serve. Government and its information should be open by default. Data paid for by Canadians belongs to Canadians. We will restore trust in our democracy, and that begins with trusting Canadians. He said he would not resort to legislative tricks to avoid scrutiny, and he would not use prorogation to avoid difficult political circumstances. Well, of course, he did that in August 2020 to shut down investigations on the We Charity scandal, and the Information Commissioner has warned that the access to information has deteriorated to the point where it no longer serves its intended purposes and no longer meets the expectations or the needs of Canadians. So this government holds this House and it holds its right to call for the production of papers, a defined privilege that the House has. The government holds that in contempt. And they have said, we do not recognize the authority of the House. We serve a higher authority, and that's the Prime Minister of Canada. And the Prime Minister of Canada is supposed to be a servant of this House, not its master. And it should not be directing the House of Commons to violate the motion that was duly passed by the majority of the members of the House of Commons. That is exactly what this Prime Minister has done. He has ordered his PMO and his department, the PCO, to ignore the lawful order of the House of Commons because he believes he knows best. It is the House that knows best. It is the House that has to exercise its rights. Because if we don't protect those rights, they will continue to be eroded under this Liberal government that doesn't care about them at all. So we would love to be discussing things like the failed Liberal bail policies that allow a violent repeat offender to shoot a police officer in Toronto yesterday. We would love to be talking about ways we can make that better. We'd love to have a debate about whether it's a bad thing to call the offender names when he is a known violent repeat offender who just shot a police officer, and we see the Liberal government and the people propping them up getting up and decrying the language used to describe those individuals. We'd be happy to have that debate, but today we have to have the debate to protect the rights and privileges of the House of Commons. The government could make this go away today by complying with that order, by complying with the lawful order of the House of Commons. If they do not, Conservatives will continue to stand up for the rights and privileges of the House of Commons because we are sent here by Canadians to do the people's business, and this place must continue to be held in the highest regard. It must be the place that is the highest authority when it comes to the people's business, and the rights and privileges of this place must be respected by the government if we are to continue to hold this government to account. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.